Caddis Maximus here, this time reviewing a Mazdam JackAll 4-foot farm jack, sometimes known as a railroad jack, or the first company that popularized them, a high lift jack, known as a farmer's jack, an off-road jack, but they have a variety of different names here. Let me give you a better look at this. Alright, here we are again. I have it laid out on the floor. I'm actually several feet away. This is a 4-foot version. So these are the famous beam type jacks. They were actually invented in 1905. And they're a very handy jack, although they're large, so a lot of people don't have them for general use. Obviously for automotive use, like in your shop, they're not very stable because they have a pin or just a tang down there and then a foot. But the big deal about these types of jacks, which are known as climbing pin jacks, is that they are mechanical, so you can force them up and down. Where like a hydraulic jack or journaling jacks or any of that kind of stuff are meant to lift, but they won't actually pull. And that's a big difference, and why they're used on farms and all that kind of stuff off-road is because it can be used as a cable puller or come-along, because you can reverse each direction, so you can have something on the between the foot and that, and it becomes either a lifting jack or something to push. If you have an accessory like this, which is the clamping type accessory, then you can actually use it to clamp various things together. Say if you're tightening cables for a fence, you can use it to pull them real tight before you secure them. They work in any position, so they don't have to be standing up. They can be used horizontally like this, and you can have one end tied to a tree and then another end cable around, like either through the eye hole, which is kind of thin down there, or just around the foot, and then use it to actually extricate or pull on something, say a stuck vehicle. And they have a ton of uses like that. They're commonly used to uproot fence posts. You'll just cut the fence post off, or even don't even need to cut it off. You can just use a rope that you wrap around to get a nice tight grip on it, and then you just put the farm jack on the ground, and as you jack it up, it actually will lift the whole post and maybe the concrete footing that it's in. It'll lift it all out of the ground, and they're really amazing in that aspect, and that's one of the reasons I have this one. Now, this company is still around. These types of jacks run around $100, and they tend to have a forged steel beam, and then the rest of the components are cast. And sorry about holding the camera by hand. This thing is so massive, unwieldy, being 4 feet long, that I'd have to be 10 feet away from it to get the whole thing in the frame. So it's better that I hold on to the phone so you can at least get a better look at it. This is one of the original JackAlls. These were a Canadian-made jack by the JackAll American company, and then they were bought out by Mazdam, which was a big manufacturer of pretty decent cable pullers. But there's been some complaints, they're still pretty good, but there's been some complaints that when they went after JackAll was purchased by Mazdam, that there's been some quality issues with the whole mechanism not working. And I know they still sell them. I'll include the part number in the description. But there is one difference, is on these old JackAlls, they had this protection plate. Now what you have here is a lever, and that's the reversing lever. Now what this plate does is prevent you from accidentally hitting this lever when you're using it in all the different kinds of situations that it can be used in. That's what this is for, is to prevent any accidental, to protect the reverse lever. And it was actually really nice. So this has to be lifted all the way up so that the end of the reverse lever is now exposed, and you can operate it, and you know that the handle is up and out of the way. So let's show the operation of how a climbing pin jack works. There's many good YouTube videos about these types of jacks, but none of them are really like up close and personal when it showed how these work. But what you have is you have a upper pin and a lower pin. The upper pin is what the lifting fork is connected to. The lower pin is actually a separate moving piece. So when you have it in the lifting position, it makes sense when the lever, the reverse lever, is actually in the upward position, it wants to go up. And when you have it in the downward position, it wants to go down. Here we are. We got a little bit better of an angle, and I have the camera on a tripod again. So what ends up happening is each of these pins latches through each of the holes that are in this beam. So these jacks won't go to real fine distances. They're not like a hydraulic jack where you can jack it up to just any exacting position. It is generally limited to jacking between the hole spacing, which is about 3/4 of an inch or so. I take that back. I actually believe it's 1 inch. But if you look at the mechanism down here, when you jack it, what ends up happening is the bottom pin down here is latching to one of the holes, and it pushes the upper part up, and you can see the pin retract, snap into the next hole, and now that's secured. And when you lift the handle back up, that bottom foot gets drug up. There's a little cam and a big lever right here, and that's generally how these work. It just climbs up and down. Each pin snaps into place, and that's why it's known as a climbing pin jack. And because of this mechanical operation, that's why it works in any position. So up we go. We just go back and forth, and it just snaps each pin, and that's what's really taking all the loads, the sheer strength of these pins. You always got to keep them pretty well lubricated. And then, of course, to lower it down, these are all, and I've noticed this with these types of jacks, there's one thing about them, and it seems that if there's no weight on it whatsoever and you just have gravity, when you hit this reverse lever, the darn thing just wants to drop. Let me lift it back up again here. We'll just kick that lever, lift it back up. If we can get this handle, you do need quite a bit of space because the handle actually has to swing down 90 degrees. You can see how far I have to move it just to get each ratchet point. So that can be an issue. If you're like stuck in a ditch, you have to actually pre-lift up the jack and hope that you can get it under the frame of the vehicle or whatever to get logs under the tire. And if you don't have space to swing this handle, then, you know, it can be a funky situation. That's where things get dangerous, because obviously, because this jack is so tall and they have a pretty narrow foot. This isn't the stock foot, but it's, you know, a compatible heel, I should say. They can be very unbalanced, and that's, you know, these actually used to be a standard for lifting vehicles, you know, back in the early 1900s. But man, a lot of things had fallen over on people because of them. But they're just such a useful tool. And the big deal about them being used off-road again is just because they can be used to lift really, really high, as well as pulling and all sorts of other things. Now, as I was saying, we have this up. If I have some pressure on this, and this seems to be kind of common. I've used High Lift brand, which seem to be the original and the more premium ones. You got to have just a little bit of load when you're reversing it. And then it always seems to work fine, and then it just fell. And as far as doing the review, they still sell this product, but there's a big difference. I have one of the original ones before they were bought out by Mazdam. Apparently Mazdam had went into bankruptcy, came out of bankruptcy, and that may explain some of the differences, because I've always had great experience with this one. And really part of the purpose of these jacks is they should be super duper reliable. As long as those pins are able to spring back and forth, everything else is forced. And, you know, they should be able to work in just really gritty, dirty environments. And then, of course, one final advantage to these types of jacks is that they are mechanical, which means they won't sag or creep or lower down over time, unless, of course, they're on dirt and they sink into the dirt. But unlike a hydraulic jack, which can leak down, and it's why you can never use hydraulic jacks as jack stands or long-term holding, because they will sag. They will slowly seep fluid pressure out, and then they won't hold whatever you put them under. So things like journaling jacks, screw jacks, and climbing pin jacks, once you lift something up, you can leave it there forever. Literally, it could be on this thing. You know, this is all steel. This would last a century in the right environment. You know, even outside, or much longer than that. So that is one nice aspect, is it will sit and then it will hold in the absolute position. And then, of course, one of the better or other advantages is it's only about 6 inches off the ground, so it can get really low compared to a bottle jack, especially given its overall travel capacity or capability. And I should also mention that any decent one is going to be like this, where they have cotter pins, so all the pins and everything can come apart, so you can completely disassemble it into every little piece. And they do weld the handle on this one. Many of them have removable handles, and people like that, so that would be an option to keep an eye out for. But another big one is being able to disassemble it. Harbor Freight, of course, has these. But when it comes to a jack kind of like this, you know, it's a big deal to actually spend a little more money. And since a good one only costs $150, it might buy you one of the best ones on the market. They're surprisingly cost effective. You really do want to get a higher quality one, just because, you know, really poor quality ones, there's much more of a gamble. You know, on a hydraulic jack, it's kind of one thing. But on something like this, which is really promoted to be made very cheaply and poorly, you know, the corners tend to be cut more steeply on something like this, and that's why you do want a higher quality one. And they make different sizes. There are manufacturers that make little 2-foot ones. This is rated for 4 tons. I don't know if I mentioned that. I think the thumbnail image will have the capacity. But, you know, there's little 2-foot ones, but the standard length is like 4 feet, which is what this one is, and then there's 5 feet and 6 feet. And those are huge jacks, but they do have unrivaled travel capacity. So I think I'm going to end this review there. Sorry for the kind of the odd angle. Oops, dropped my camera. I got to get a better camera holder. Anyway, these things are huge, but they're really handy. It's actually quite surprising. And once you have one around, if you do a lot of work, you know, whether it's construction or obviously off-roading or live out in the country, these types of jacks can be real lifesavers. But, you know, they're, you know, big and unwieldy, and they're not really sold or stocked very many places at all. I think mainly farm supplies is where you might find these in an area local to you. But they really are a handy jack, and I kind of wanted to add my 2 cents. And then even review the JackAll brand, because they used to be really high quality like this one. I mean, the castings are nice. They've all been sanded down here. Nice forged steel beam that's really straight. You know, pretty reliable operation. You know, one big issue with these is the pins get all messed up or corroded, and then they won't snap into place, and then the thing becomes useless. But one nice aspect is all you need is a piece of, you know, you'd want some high-strength steel. Those pins are 9/16, so you could just get some 9/16, you know, high-strength steel, 4140 or something like that. And all you need is a drill cross hole for the retention pin, and cut it to length, and then grind a chamfer on it. So you need a grinder and a drill, and you can actually replace the pins yourself pretty easy in any home shop, and a vise to hold it. So that's kind of a nice aspect. The wear components can be easily homemade. Anyway, I think I'll end it there. I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, even watching my weird reviews of farm jacks. I really appreciate everybody who has subscribed. I really do. And of course, I always ask that if you do enjoy my content or have an interest in it, please do subscribe. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.